Hey friends, welcome to another week of Tea Time at the Water's Edge. This week we are covering a bit of a heavier topic. We're talking about infertility and miscarriage and what that looks like in the church and in the lives of women that love the Lord and we're trying to please Him, and how to have a biblical perspective on our fertility and loss. And we have two very special guests today. We'll all be sharing our stories. I hope you keep listening. All right, guys, welcome back to Tea Time. Today I have Allyson back again with me. I know a lot of you really liked the episode that I just did with her. Thankful for the feedback for that. And we also have another guest. We have Cathy on today, who I'm really thankful for. So I had actually asked the women in our church if anyone would be willing to come on and share their story, specifically an older woman, because I thought that was something that was needed. And I'm really thankful you were one of the only people that responded. And so I'm thankful that we're all here to talk about our experiences with this topic. It is a bit of a heavier topic, but I think it's something that isn't really talked about a lot. I think it's starting to, become a little more normalized, and it's a lot more common than I think people think that it is. And so I'll just go ahead and kind of share my story. Anyway, so we moved here in 2021, had our first child a few months after moving here. And then when she was 8 months old, I found out that I was pregnant again. So this was in 2022. And I found out at I think I was about 5 weeks pregnant. And then I ended up miscarrying a week later. So there was a lot of emotions within that week, just, trying to work through, being pregnant. And also I was struggling a lot mentally because having an 8-month-old, I already, still felt like a new mom. I still kind of felt like I just had a baby. I still was at the point where I thought that I could plan, we could plan all of our pregnancies and how far apart we wanted all of our kids. And so, just working through all of that. And then I felt like by the time I came to terms with being pregnant again, I started having some spotting, which I knew as a nurse, and I was working at the crisis pregnancy center at the time. I knew that could be normal, but it just kind of got worse and worse. And then there was one night in particular where I just woke up in the middle of the night. I was in a lot of pain, and the bleeding got a lot worse. So I ended up going to the doctor, obviously, and I was too early for them to do an ultrasound anyway, but they did some blood work, looked at what my pregnancy hormone levels were at, because at that point they're supposed to be like doubling every day. They're supposed to be at a certain number, and mine were like not even close to where it was supposed to be. So I knew, and you're supposed to go back 24 to 48 hours later to have them draw the level again to see if it's going up or down. But I knew with that first number that it wasn't a viable pregnancy. And so, like I said, there was just a lot of emotions in just such a short amount of time. Mm-hmm. I think the weirdest thing to like look back on is that when you're miscarrying, what's happening, but you can't do anything to stop it. And it's like, it's a process. It's not just like a one day, it happens and it's gone. And I remember, it was hard having another child to look after. But at the same time, it was also a blessing because I couldn't I couldn't just wallow and just like sit on the couch all day and fixate on it. And it also changed my perspective on just like having children in general, just that you can't plan anything really. You have no control over when you get pregnant, how far apart your kids are, if you can have multiple kids. Really, it takes the Lord to sustain a pregnancy. And I just was reminded of like what a gift it was. And I remember thinking, even if I can just the fact that I have one child, like that is such a gift and a miracle. Like every pregnancy and every baby is a miracle, the way that it all happens from beginning to end. Yeah. And it's still hard. Like both me and my husband, like we still individually will just think about it randomly, like wondering, was that baby, was it a girl or a boy? Like what would our family have looked like if I didn't miscarry? But I think some main things that I kind of thought about, just to share with like our church and anyone else that might be listening. If as a Christian, if you are pro-life, if you believe that life begins at conception, then by definition, a miscarriage is losing a child. And so I think a lot of people in an effort to be compassionate, they try to downplay it like, oh, well, at least you were early. At least you didn't have an ultrasound yet, so you didn't see anything. And also just remembering that like a subsequent pregnancy doesn't replace that pregnancy that you had lost, which I think is just another way of people trying to make you feel better about the situation. But even now, I mean, I got pregnant again a few months later with our 7-month-old, but that doesn't take away the pregnancy that I had lost. That's still a whole separate human being that was here and is not here anymore. And it's something that like I want to talk to our kids about. I don't want to hide it or just forget about it because it was a baby that we lost. But another thing, kind of blessing that came out of that, just like a shift with my thinking, is as a parent, like you want so badly for your kids to go to heaven someday. Like you want them to know the Lord. Yeah. And in like my grieving process, I realized like how amazing is it that we at least have one baby that has seen Jesus before we have. And I don't know what that's going to look like in heaven. I don't know like if there's just going to be a bunch of babies waiting for us. But like that's such a comfort, and I know we've said this on the podcast before, but I just don't know how people who aren't Christians, how they process things like that.
Yeah.
And I think it's also good for you yourself, if you've had a miscarriage, to not downplay it in those same ways that I mentioned, that, you did lose a child, and we'll talk about this a little more further into the episode, but it is okay to grieve, and it's expected to grieve. It's actually, you shouldn't try to downplay or brush over it. But yeah, that's kind of my story. And then I also wanted Cathy to come on. So she had shared briefly with me that you had had a miscarriage as well. So could you tell us a little bit about that situation?
Well, Kathleen asked for a older lady, and my miscarriage was over 40 years ago. So that's a long time. I had a 5-year-old daughter and was pregnant. And I don't know if most mothers are like this, but as soon as whenever I became pregnant, it was like I start planning. That baby's so real. I start thinking about them and, what will they be like and where will their room be? And you get all excited about it. And so I was the same way at that time. And I was about 4 months along, and it was a pretty sunny day, and it was near Mother's Day. And I was sitting on the stoop of my house with my other daughter, and I knew I was pregnant, of course, by then, and I started having spotting. But I said, well, this happened. I had read enough to know that this happens, and it's probably okay. And I didn't have any cramping or anything like that, but I knew I needed to go see the doctor to make sure. And the next day, my friend took me to the doctor and just to the office, and he examined me, and he said, "You're having a miscarriage." And I was in shock, I guess, because I really had convinced myself that it was just something normal. And I said, just out of shock, I said, "Are you sure?" And he got very indignant after that and said, "Of course I'm sure, there's tissue here." And he was just very rude, in fact. And so that made it harder. And it was unfortunate circumstances at that time that he decided to do a D&C in the office. No anesthetic, no anesthesia, nothing. He just did it without asking me anything. So it was quite traumatic. Actually,
and were you alone?
I was by myself, yes. Okay. My friend was actually in the waiting room with my daughter at that time. So, yes, I was by myself. And it took me a while to get over it, and I had to go back for a 2-week checkup, and the doctor was surprised, quote, that I wasn't over it yet at 2 weeks. And I had gotten a little teary-eyed, and that's when he said that to me. And I just didn't understand because it takes a long time to get over losing a child, and
if ever.
Yeah, and it's hard. And I remember for years and years and years and years, every Mother's Day, I would always think about that baby and how old that baby would be, and what would they be like, and like you said, whether it would be a boy or a girl. It's a hard thing. And at that time, I think miscarriage was almost looked at as being a fault of the mothers or something wrong with them, instead of just something that happens in nature when there's something wrong or whatever. But I was so lucky in a way because I had moved into a neighborhood. God put me in a neighborhood with a lot of Christian people. And I had Christian ladies who just were so kind to me. And one neighbor in particular that I'm still friends with today, she had just moved into the neighborhood, and she was pregnant, and she was afraid to come and see me. And one of our other neighbors talked to her and told her that she should come anyway. And she did come to see me, and I was fine with it. I didn't have a problem with it, but we've been friends ever since and supported each other through lots of things that life has thrown at us. And it was just wonderful to have these ladies that cared, that understood.
And were you going to a church at the time?
Yes, I was going to a church. I don't remember anybody from church reaching out. I don't know if I can't remember if I didn't talk about it that much. I know I remember that there weren't many resources, and there weren't books that you could read. They were in very short supply, but I did find one book on miscarriage, and I put that book in our church library because I was determined that there would be one there next time something happened. And so that's what I did.
That's wonderful.
Wow. Yeah, I think for me, like, because I wasn't happy right away when I found out I was pregnant, because like you said, you're thinking about, like, your mind immediately jumps to like for me, I was like, okay, how are we going to have two so close together, like where are they going to sleep? Like what you're thinking about, you feel like you're going to have the baby tomorrow.
Yep, everything.
And then when I realized I was miscarrying, there was a small, just that small whisper of like, this is why like God's taking the baby away because you weren't happy. You should have just been happy. And I think women can feel guilt for different reasons when they miscarry. It could be something like that, or maybe, maybe they feel like maybe they didn't take their vitamins right away or something. Like maybe they didn't start their prenatal vitamins, or I think it's very easy for a woman to immediately find something to blame it on that she did or didn't do. But as a Christian, I love that verse that says there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And that's, God doesn't punish you like that. Like that's not consistent with his character. So it took me a little while to really think through that. And I don't feel that way anymore. I feel like he actually used that for good. But I was wondering too with you, like how that affected your faith and how you grew through that.
It tests your faith at first, like a lot of things do, but then you realize that God works everything out. And I just felt so blessed that 2 years later I had another little girl, and I named her Grace, which means gift from God. So that's what she's always been to me, is gift from God. She's helped me through some rough times because I had her to distract me from other things that were going on. Yeah. And yeah.
Were you really anxious that next pregnancy because you had miscarried before?
Yeah, you do think about that, and you're like, wait till I get past that point, and it'll be okay. But she was born right on time and healthy, and just a real blessing.
Yeah.
Praise God.
Oh. Yeah, I feel like I don't know, this topic is kind of a lot, but I think it is good that we're talking about it because like you had said, like the church that you were going to, like that is so sad that you felt like maybe at the time you felt like you couldn't tell people, or maybe you didn't want to, and that you put that book in the library because you felt like, I mean, I feel like that's a sign that it was not talked about at all, or in a positive or encouraging light, which I'm thankful. I'm thankful. Maybe it's also partially, like you mentioned, that just how times have changed. Yeah. I don't know what the statistics were 40 years ago, but I know now. I think it's 1 in 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage, so it's very, very common. And I'm sure there's multiple things that affect that. But another thing that is common that I wanted to talk about is infertility, which is also something else that I think is just being talked about more, and there's less shame kind of around that. But I wanted us to talk about it because I think in the church we like the family is so central to the church, and it's talked about so much in the Bible. And especially as a woman, your natural, like as a Christian woman, your natural train of thought is, I get married and then I have children and we raise our kids and we, disciple them for Christ and all these things. And so when it doesn't happen, I think it's similar when women, don't get married when they want to. When and if you can't have children when you want to, it feels like, I mean, you're going to talk about this, but I'm sure it feels like, like there's something wrong with you. And I'm really thankful that you're here to share your story. So I'm just going to let you take this part. And I know a lot of it already because we've shared things. Yeah. But, yeah, if you want to go ahead and just share whatever you feel like sharing.
Yeah, and I think because nowadays we do hear a lot more about miscarriage and infertility. Every woman and every man and every couple experiences it differently. And so I just want to be cautious with what I say, because I know that, yeah, everyone's walk is so different through infertility or delayed fertility, secondary infertility, whatever that may look like. But my husband and I, when we got married, we, again, with the planning, I feel like we plan so much and we fool ourselves into thinking we have so much more control than we actually do. And that's something that I've learned. But when we got married, we had a plan for our marriage, and whatever your opinion on this is, but, we were going to wait for a little while to build intimacy with one another and move states and transition out of the military and all that stuff. And so we did. We waited for a little while, and when that long awaited for time came, I had no reason to believe that this would ever be my story. I was healthy. My husband was healthy. Everything with me was like clockwork. Everything worked perfectly. And so a month after we had started, quote unquote, trying, which is a word I hate now. I hate the word trying. But I was like, oh, I'm pregnant for sure. Like, this is going to happen right now. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months rolls around, and I'm just flabbergasted. And I am shocked. And no one had ever talked to me about this stuff. No one had ever told me quite the contrary. I feel like a lot of us grew up fearing getting pregnant at the wrong time, or, even going near a boy or something like that. Like, that's just kind of like how a lot of us thought about pregnancy. And then here we are methodically trying to achieve it, and it's not happening. And so it was this dichotomy of like, okay, I thought this was going to be really simple, like what's going on? And then now the reality is I have no control over anything, even though I'm trying to control every aspect of the process. It's very evident that I don't have control. And so around the 6-7 month mark, I really started panicking. And I was in nursing school, so I have all the research at my fingertips. And I mean, even if you're not in nursing school, you have all the research at your fingertips nowadays. And so I did so much research. I was just measuring everything, making sure everything was in order. And around this time was when I feel like my faith really started to take a toll. In the sense that I felt gypped. I felt like someone somewhere had sold me a bill of goods that was no good. Like, someone had lied to me. And in the sense that, like, I wasn't prepared. I wasn't prepared as a woman, and I wasn't prepared as a Christian to go through something like this. And so just that unexpectedly, I started feeling a lot of things that I never thought I would feel. And I did. I felt really angry at God, because I think a lot of couples who walk through infertility at some point feel like God is withholding. And that's a whole learning process. But you feel like God is withholding, and you're confused because you know that this is a blessing, and we are to desire children as Christians, and you see other people becoming pregnant so easily, or, you know, again, like relative ease, or, you know, and also people who don't even want children are becoming pregnant. You know, the uproar around us about abortion and all of that. So you just start to like pull back, and you're just confused. And so every month, like month in, month out, after like the 6-month mark, was pretty, I dreaded it. I just dreaded every aspect of it. And of course, your marriage takes a toll. And that's something that I never wanted to happen. I always wanted to protect our marriage and our relationship and our intimacy. And at some point, you can try all you want, but just the worry and the constant analyzing the situation and comparison to others, and maybe this is wrong, maybe that's wrong, just like all of that, it just takes a toll. And so we walked that road for a little bit longer, and I had 2 really negative experiences with the healthcare system, where I just went in to my regular doctor and I was like, you know, I need information. Something's not quite right. Like, I know it. I'm measuring all this stuff. Like, I'm very educated about what's going on, and just being so flippantly just dismissed out of the room, and just making you feel like, okay, no one's taking me seriously. No one is trying to help me. And so I had those experiences, and then my husband and I decided, okay, let's get some more help, some blood draws, like let's see what's going on inside the body. And you know, walking that road too, I learned what kind of like a twist sometimes there is inside the fertility industry. And some people have wonderful experiences with it, but I just felt like a walking dollar bill. I didn't feel like they cared what we were going through whatsoever. And so that was defeating. And that was around, I don't know, month 11, 12. And then the 12-year mark that I feel like every woman fears after trying to conceive, because that 1-year mark is it's such a benchmark. And all the doctors tell you, well, you know, if you haven't tried for a whole year, then no one's going to see you. Like, you know, you have to try for a year. And so I experienced a lot of anxiety around the one-year mark. And I just felt so utterly defeated around that 1-year mark. And again, just my faith taking a toll. And now looking back, I realized that everything started with who I said God was and the character of God, like what I believed about his character. Because if you start with that, then if you say that God is good and you believe that, then anything that comes or does not come is also good. If he is good, then whatever comes or does not come is also good. And but just the feeling of like, God, you're withholding something good from me. And then the shame comes because it's like, maybe I've sinned. Maybe you're trying to teach me like a hard lesson. Maybe you know, I'm not adequate enough to be a mother. Maybe you know, just a million things. But around the 1-year mark, I was utterly exhausted. And I realized that I had his character wrong. And this is something, like you said, Cathy, like it just, a lot of things that we experience as Christians really do, they test our faith. And when I was going through that first year, I just felt, I didn't look at it that way. But when God brought me out of like what I call like the really, really rough patch, and now that some of the fog has cleared, I see that my faith was not as strong as I thought it was. Before any of this happened, I thought I was rock solid in my faith. Like nothing could shake it. There was no way. Being angry at God was not something that I ever thought I would find myself in. And here the test was revealing all the cracks in my faith and in my knowledge of God. And so now I see it as a grace of His, that He did not just leave me there with my misinformed faith and conception, like thoughts of Him. He was not going to leave me there. He was going to rectify my thoughts and give me a wider perspective of my God. And so I've learned so much, and my husband has learned so much. We've learned so much through all of it. Yeah, and as y'all know, like this topic is humongous, and there's no way we would ever say everything. But yeah, that's kind of like what we've walked through so far.
And you're still walking through it,
and we're
too.
still walking, yeah.
Are there things, I know, like I've asked you personally, just like, you know, like when I found out I was pregnant again, I remember asking you like, hey, how do you want me to like interact with you basically on this topic? Because I don't want to say anything to hurt you.
Yeah.
And I want to be sensitive to what you're going through, but I also don't want to feel like I need to hide from you.
Yeah.
So what would you say to, you know, people in the church that maybe just, they want to help you, they want to say the right thing, but they're not really sure how to go about that?
Yeah, I think that's so hard. And I'd love to hear what Cathy thinks about this too, just like with the friend that you had that got pregnant and was kind of like hesitant to come over and everything. But Kat, this is one of the really dark feelings that I thought I would never feel as a Christian. And it's bitterness and it's envy, and it's really difficult to walk through because I think I've walked through 7 or 8 pregnancies with my close friends and my family members while my husband and I have been walking through infertility. And I can tell you honestly that every single one of those pregnancies has been just as much joy as it has been heartache. And it's such a confusing thing to feel because, and honestly, I feel like it stems from our flesh has a tendency to just compare, and it really robs us of so much joy. And I have not figured out how to stop comparing. I mean, it's a constant battle that I go through, not only in this area, but in a lot of areas. But I would say that for the person walking through infertility, I would say we have to have so much grace for our friends who are experiencing this blessing and are so excited, which makes complete sense. And grace in the fact that they're not always going to say the right thing. They're not always going to approach you the right way. And I mean, me knowing that like one day I may be good and solid and you can come to me and share all the joys of your pregnancy and I'll be fine. And the very next day, it'll just utterly destroy me. And so no one can predict where you are in that process. And so we have to have so much grace for our friends who may not understand, and that's okay. I don't understand a lot of things that my friends and my family members and my brothers and sisters in Christ go through because I've never gone through it. So having a lot of grace for other people at church who will ask you like, when are the kids coming? Like, you know, not jumping to the conclusion of, oh, well, they should know better. Not really, not always. And so just having a lot of grace. And then for people who have never walked in this infertility struggle, I think just really just loving the people that are going through it. I mean, just like every struggle, you know, a diagnosis or a loss of any sort, like you just love that person as best you can. I think the best thing, I feel the most loved when someone just asks me how I'm doing in that area. Because you make the person feel like they're not forgotten. Their struggle is on your mind. You've been praying for their struggle, and it just makes them, it's very encouraging for someone to ask me, you know, like, how are you guys doing in this area? How are you holding up? I personally find it very encouraging. So just loving them and kind of like what you did, just asking, you know, I want to be a good friend. Tell me how I can be a good friend. Because
I know for you, I think you had told me that like it does actually help you. I don't remember exactly what you said, but like basically that you want to hear me talk about my pregnancy, that you don't want me to hide it.
No.
Because it gives you joy knowing that I'm happy about this gift.
Yeah.
But then I'd like that might be different for like
For sure.
that might be different for somebody else. So that is a good point to just ask. Yeah. But yeah, how was that for you, Cathy? Do you remember what that first interaction with that friend that was pregnant, that at first she didn't want to come over? Like, did you talk to her about that and tell her, you know, no, this is okay, like I don't mind?
Yeah, I did. It didn't bother me because I was happy for her, and you know, you're bound to see other pregnant women when you've been through something like that. It's not going to be avoidable. But it was perfectly fine. I was glad to have her there.
Yeah. I remember. This just reminded me when I miscarried, and it was like Memorial Day weekend, and I would have been due in January, and so it was like later on in the summer when I would have been about like 15 weeks, and like I said, I was still working at the Crisis Pregnancy Center where we would do ultrasounds and things for women that either weren't sure if they wanted to keep the baby or were planning on getting an abortion, but they were just coming for like preliminary medical things. And I remember I was about to do an ultrasound for this patient, and she was not sure what she wanted to do with the pregnancy. Her boyfriend was there, and before you're doing the ultrasound, you have to type all their information in the machine, and you have to put their due date in. And I remember looking at it, and it was the same due date that I would have had. And so I'm doing this ultrasound, and I'm like watching, you know, at 15 weeks, the baby's pretty big and they're moving and they're full size baby. So everything that was going through my mind was like, you know, like comparing, like you said, just thinking like, oh man, like I would have been able to feel the baby move by now. I would have known if they were a boy or a girl. And also just, you know, having a little bit of like, of anger towards this woman of like, how could you even question what you wanted to do? And thank God I was just praying the whole time, and I was able to kind of block it out just for the appointment time that I needed to be able to talk to her. Yeah. And just as a side note, I was really thankful to be working at a ministry where everyone else knew that I had had a miscarriage and were very, just checking in on me after that and things like that. That was really helpful. But yeah, I think for miscarriage and infertility, it is like an ongoing process, and it's a roller coaster of ups and downs. And I know, like you've said before, some days you feel fine and you're like, all right, I'm just trusting in the Lord and I know it's going to be fine. And then there's other days where you're really not okay. And I think for women, it's hard because we have, 30-day cycles.
100%.
And so it's constantly on our mind.
Every minute.
And I know you've talked a little bit about talk to me about the difference between like you and Richard, like his outlook on it is a little bit different because it's not his body that's going through all these physical things.
Yeah. I think that's also something, not that I do think that the husbands of the women going through miscarriage and infertility, this isn't a woman problem. And I think, I can tell you 100%, like my husband has had his own struggle. Mainly, I think, trying to stay focused on his own walk. Because, as women, well, at least for me, like I am just a hot mess. Like when I am down, I am down, and I can't seem to figure out what's up, what's down, what's left, and what's right. And as our husbands and, hopefully and God willing, like they do want to protect us and they do want to help us. And sometimes they get so fixated with like, okay, I need to figure out this problem. I need to fix it. And they neglect their own walk with the Lord. And I think that is something that my husband would tell every man of a woman going through anything like this is do not neglect your own walk with the Lord. Because that is the most helpful thing you can do for your significant other is building your own intimacy with God. And, but yeah, it's just, and just waiting. I realized how awful I am at waiting. I always thought, and it's funny because again, I always like, well, I can be patient in line. Okay. I can be patient in traffic. I don't have a problem with that. And here I am, though, God stretching that patience a little bit more to 6 months, 7, 8, a year and a half. Like how long? And we don't, again, it reveals cracks where you did not know that there were any. And, people in the Bible, like are the people who have gone before us and who God has provided for. They've had to wait decades, generations for things. God waited for me for 28 years to come to him, or 25 years to come to him. And so, but I am not good at waiting. That's what I've realized. And by God's grace, I think he's sanctifying me against my will, but I'm so grateful for his sanctification because, I wouldn't want it any other way.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a few kind of like key takeaways that I wanted to run through just about this whole topic. And the first one that I kind of already mentioned is that it's okay to grieve the pain that you're going through. It's funny. So we're recording on a Sunday. And so this morning, obviously, we were in church and we're doing a walk through the Old Testament. And so when Pastor Steve read from 1 Samuel, I was like, I was like, I'm going to read that later. And he didn't touch on this exact topic, but I almost texted Allyson during church. I was like, he's reading it.
Yes.
But I just love this story,
Yeah.
which I didn't really think about it until we were going to record this episode. And I was trying to think of different passages to bring up. But so in 1 Samuel 1, it's about Hannah, and it says that the Lord has closed her womb, and she's, distraught, obviously, and she's praying in the temple, and Eli, the priest, is kind of watching her.
Yeah.
And this is starting in verse 12. It says, as she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was speaking in her heart, only her lips moved, and her voice was not heard. Therefore, Eli took her to be a drunken woman, which is just like, that's why I say it's okay to grieve, because Eli thought, like, she was so beside herself that he thought she was drunk.
Yeah.
And it says, and Eli said to her, how long will you go on being drunk? Put your wine away from you. But Hannah answered, no, my lord, I am a woman troubled in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for all along I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation. And I just love that whole passage. I feel like that's very specific on how much pain she was feeling. Yeah. Then Eli answered, go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition that you have made to him. And she said, let your servant find favor in your eyes. Then the woman went her way and ate, because she hadn't eaten, and her face was no longer sad. And I just love that picture. And obviously, like in the Psalms, there's like David was broken over things. Talks about like I read something the other day about like his pillow being drenched with tears.
Yeah.
And another story that I love is that Jesus wept with Mary and Martha when Lazarus died, even though he knew he was just about to raise him from the dead. Like, he wept with them because he had compassion on them.
Yes.
And the second thing, which we've kind of already said, is that there's nothing wrong with you, whether you're miscarrying, maybe you've miscarried multiple times, or you're going through infertility. There's nothing wrong with you in the sense that you can't do anything to overall really keep it from happening, because God is the one that ultimately is in control of all of it. And we live, like, this is a fallen world. Our bodies don't work the way that they're supposed to. And so we can do everything that we can to make sure that all of our ducks are lined up in a row. And, but ultimately things are just going to happen. Even when you do get pregnant and you carry the pregnancy and you give birth, as we know, there's a lot of, things can go wrong with that too. And I love, and like the Lord knows that. He knows that, we're fallen creatures. We're only human. Yeah. And so this is another passage that I wanted to read. This is from Psalm 103 in verse 10. It says that he does not deal with us according to our sins, nor repay us according to our iniquities. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his steadfast love toward those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far does he remove our transgressions from us. As a father shows compassion to his children, so the Lord shows compassion to those who fear him. For he knows our frame, he remembers that we are dust.
So good.
So just like taking rest in that and just knowing that it's not on you. And it's also like, as a woman, your measure of godliness does not depend on if you're able to have children or how many kids you have. And that was something that I remember kind of wrestling through, because we, like when you get married, you think about how many kids you want to have, and people ask you, how many kids do you want? As if you can just like pick.
I know.
But yeah, I mean, you can't control that. And there's nothing, it doesn't make you more godly the more kids you have. Like, yes, a woman that has 10 kids is probably going to have more practical wisdom than somebody who has one kid, but it doesn't mean that she's more godly, or anything like that.
And this is the thing too. I feel like I don't know about men, but I feel like as women, we forget that we say children are a blessing, but then we forget that children are a blessing. They're one blessing. They are not the blessing or the blessing above all blessings. They are a beautiful blessing. But I feel like, and I've walked through this, I've gotten so fixated on this blessing. Like, Lord, you can give me 10 blessings today. I want this one, though. Not those 10. I want this one. And so just realizing that he is a God of blessings, of many blessings. And if we neglect the gifts and the blessings that he has already given us and we're not stewarding them because we're so focused on this blessing over here that he has not yet given us, we're not stewarding what he's already given us well. That's not honoring to the Lord, and that's really hard to come to grips with. But I feel like it's definitely something we need to come to grips with, that children are a blessing, but God gives so many blessings.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember reading in this parenting book, I think it's, there's a Paul David Tripp one that's just called like parenting or something. But he says in that book, like, God doesn't give you children because he thinks you're going to be a good parent. So he's not like, oh, like, she's like going to be a really good mom, so I'm going to give her lots of kids. And this one, like, not so much, so I'm not going to give her as many. And that was really helpful for me because, it just, like, humbles you a little bit because our children, like, yes, they are ours, but they're only ours for a season, and ultimately they belong to the Lord. And so I think that's a good reminder too. And also, like you had said, just remembering that God is good and remembering his character, because when you go through any trial, I think it's so easy to question him and feel like, why are you doing this? This doesn't make any sense. But like you said, Allyson, just going back to his character and what it is, and if what you're thinking about him in that moment, like, is that actually true? Does God, like, is he withholding something from me?
That's what Eve believed.
Yeah,
that's exactly what Eve believed.
Yeah. And just one last verse that I wanted to share, which I had heard this verse on a different podcast that I was listening to the other day, just talking about, like, even though we live in a fallen world, like, God is still good, and he still obviously is sovereign over all of that. But this is from Psalm 27, verse 13. It says that I believe that I shall look upon the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. And I just love that. Like, I believe that I shall look upon the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Like, you still will see his goodness in so many other ways, and I'm sure you have as well. And I think it is also just like a practical thing. I think it's helpful for women to just talk about it, find somebody, if this is something that if you've gone through it or are going through and you haven't told anybody, I think it would be really helpful to share that, because like I said at the beginning of this video, it's really common now, and you might be surprised if you share with somebody, that, like, maybe they went through it too, or they know somebody else.
Absolutely.
You have 3 women at this table right here who have gone through it. So yeah, I hope that this encourages people. Yeah. Did you ladies have anything else that you wanted to share?
Good.
No? Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming on. I think this will be
thank you for having us.
A blessing for those that watch and listen. But yeah, we hope that you will join us next time for Tea Time at the Water's Edge. I'm really thankful for all the feedback that you guys have been giving us. If you're watching on YouTube, please remember to like this video and subscribe if you aren't subscribed already. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave us a review. It really helps out a lot. So we will see you next time, and thanks for watching.